Homelessness is a global problem. The United Nations Human Settlements Program estimates that 1.6 billion people in the world do not have adequate housing. There are no official figures for homelessness in the European Union, but an estimated 700,000 people sleep rough in Europe. Homelessness is growing in many parts of the world, including rich countries. But one country that has seen remarkable success in tackling this crisis is Finland. It is the only European country where homelessness has been consistently declining for years. The Finnish government has also planned to completely eradicate homelessness by 2027. Finland's success in solving homelessness is attributed to its Housing First policy, which was adopted in 2008. One of the main architects of Housing First is Juha Kaakinen, who has joined me today. Juha is an experienced developer of innovative housing solutions for homeless people. He is the chief executive officer of Y Foundation, which offers affordable rental housing to homeless people and also those who are at risk of becoming homeless. Juha has also worked for many years as a researcher and a consultant on social, health, and employment issues. Today, I will talk to him about how Finland is solving its homelessness problem and whether the Finnish model can work in other places. Juha, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Yep, thank you. So now let's start with the basics first. Can you explain to me the basic idea of the Housing First policy in Finland?
This is a very interesting question because normally Housing First is described as a service model or a philosophy, but not so often as a policy. And I think that this also explains the uniqueness of the Finnish case, because in Finland, Housing First has been a national policy for several years. But I would start with the basic principles of Housing First as we understand it. It means that we try to solve homelessness by providing homeless people experiencing homelessness with a permanent housing and support according to their needs. And this housing should be provided unconditionally, so you don't have to become housing ready in parentheses. It doesn't mean that you have to solve your social and health issues before you get decent housing. But we think that housing is a basic human right, and a rental apartment with your own rental contract should be the basic requirement for any homelessness policy, any policy that aims to end homelessness. So this is how I would describe the Housing First policy. It's a national approach. Everything, all services aimed for homeless people should be based on this principle.
Okay, thanks. So the idea is that if someone is homeless in Finland, so you offer them a house and you do not set any condition for it. Like if the person has mental health problems or substance abuse problems, so that person doesn't have to solve that problem before he or she is given a house. Is that it?
I don't hear your voice now.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Now it's okay. Yeah. So I'm saying that in Finland, the Housing First policy works like this. So someone is homeless, and that person is given a house, even if that person, let's say, has substance abuse problems or like mental health problems. So you do not set any condition before giving that person a house. Is that it?
No. Yes, that's exactly the idea. That this is the revolutionary change that we had in our approach since 2008. We understood that, let's say that the reality had taught us that it really doesn't work in the real life this way, that people solve their problems and then they get a home of their own as a reward for all the efforts they have done. It's quite simple idea that when you have a permanent place, safe place, then you really have the resources also to solve the other issues. Either they may be substance abuse problems or mental health issues. But of course, you need expert help for this. The walls around you doesn't solve the issues if you have them, but it means that you have much better opportunities to cope with them.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
and we have also seen that people who have substance abuse problems, when they get a permanent home of their own, in many cases, these problems become lesser because the conditions are, it's not anymore a survival strategy to use substance or drugs, for example. Of course, not always, but in some cases, it seems that even the simply providing a permanent housing solves a lot of the issues. And of course, it creates the possibilities to connect with your family if you have lost the connection earlier, and also it gives you much better opportunities to get employment.
I understand. Thanks. So now the question is, I want to know the story behind 2000 and before 2008. So what measures did you have in Finland to deal with the homelessness crisis before you started implementing the housing first policy at the national level in 2008?
I would say that a lot of things had been done already before that. We have had national programs to reduce homelessness since 1987, when it was the International Year of the Shelter or Homelessness. And actually, we started to count homelessness in Finland at that point. There has been national programs, but the approach was more traditional. It was the so-called staircase model, that people sleeping rough or living in shelters. First, they moved to temporary accommodation. Then they moved to supported housing, and finally, at the end of the ladder, if they could solve their problems, they could get an apartment of their own. And we understood quite well in the beginning of this century that this policy doesn't work anymore. It didn't solve the issue of chronic homelessness, especially the people who have the most urgent need of support, people with substance abuse problems, people with mental health issues. This kind of staircase model simply didn't work very well. And the role of the temporary accommodation in shelters and hostels, it was still too big. It was still, I would say, the first option for homeless people. And this is how our thinking started to evolve, that we have to change this structure of the services. We have to make a systemic change so that we move away from temporary accommodation to permanent housing, because this temporary accommodation in shelters and hostels, it also creates a kind of culture of homelessness. For many homeless people, it's the only option that they really get, and you have to do something with this part of the system. So we, together with launching the Finnish Housing First, which is, by the way, based on our own thinking, although it has a lot of similarities with the original US model of Housing First, but we are not implementing the US model itself. So this was the key element, that we try to reduce the level of temporary accommodation in shelters and hostels. And we did it, for example, by converting and renovating some of the shelters and hostels into supported housing, so that there was a physical renovation. And a good example is the Salvation Army hostel they had in Helsinki for homeless men with 250 bed places. It was completely renovated in 2012, and now they have 81 independent apartments in the building. But they also have on-site staff to provide support if that's needed. And we have understood that there's not only one kind of housing solution. The main part of the housing is scattered housing, individual apartments, but also this kind of supported housing units are needed in the system. But so the key thing is to reduce the level of temporary accommodation, because it doesn't solve homelessness. it simply moves homeless people from one place to another, and it doesn't provide a sustainable solution to homelessness.
Okay, so apart from the housing first scheme, there is also social housing in Finland, and at least 25% of housing, especially in big cities, must be affordable and social housing. So I want to know, is it a mandatory requirement set by the Finnish government, this 25% social housing? And also, does this help prevent homelessness?
The role of affordable social housing, which means that this housing, the rent level is, in many cases, it's half of the market rent level. It's extremely important in two senses. I think it's the most important element of structural prevention of homelessness. It, for example, explains mainly why we don't have actually family homelessness in Finland. All our homeless persons are mostly single adults. And this 25%, actually it's based on a contract between the state and the main city regions in Finland. And it's a contract concerning land use, housing construction, infrastructure investments. And it means that in these contracts, there's a target how many new apartments should be built and what's the share of the affordable social housing of this. And as a financial incentive, the state gives money for the city regions, for example, for the traffic and infrastructure investments. And this concerns the new construction. But the total level of affordable social housing in the whole country is around 13%. But this is extremely important that in the big cities where the population is growing, there's this kind of target for affordable social housing. And actually, in the current government's program, the aim is to increase this share to 30%. So this also creates a kind of already social mix in the housing areas. So it means that we don't have this kind of concentration of people, low-income people, and also it means that this housing, as it's state subsidized housing, it means that the quality level of the housing is good. Actually, you can't make a difference in the housing area which one is affordable social housing and which one is a normal private rental housing.
Yeah, okay, I understand. So you are familiar with homelessness policies of several other countries. So I want to know, compared to the Finnish policy, what limitations or let's say shortcomings do you usually see in policies of other countries? And why are not those policies as effective as the Finnish one when it comes to reducing homelessness? I mean, why is the model in Finland producing this result, such a good result?
Yes, this is a good question, and and I have thought a lot about it, and I think that one of the reasons is that in many countries, temporary accommodation in shelters and hostels is still the main option for homeless people, and when homelessness is growing, first the states and the public authorities start to increase the level of this kind of temporary accommodation. And as I told you earlier, in our view, it doesn't provide a permanent solution to homelessness. The other one is that the level of affordable housing, affordable social housing, or some other affordable housing is not adequate. There are countries where the level of this kind of housing is extremely low. And we have seen that the private market doesn't solve the housing needs of people with low incomes and the housing needs of homeless people. And I think that there are now signs that there are several countries who have realized that the way to solve this issue is that you have a plan how you end homelessness. And in many countries, it's still a question about managing homelessness. And if you want to end homelessness, you have to base it on a sustainable policy, like the housing first policy that we have in Finland. You have to have a concrete plan how you proceed, and you need to have a very wide partnership between the state, local authorities, and NGOs. And I think that this is also rather unique in Finland, that we have had this kind of wide partnership and collaboration between different actors for quite a long time. And this kind of culture of collaboration is of course needed. Homelessness is a national issue. It can't be solved by one single party or one single actor. You need to have all the actors involved to get real results.
Okay, and now let's talk about some research. There has been research that has found that the housing first model works, but then again, some studies, especially in America, they have found that it doesn't work, in the sense that, for example, housing first only gives people a house, but doesn't improve the general well-being and the quality of life, and doesn't solve the substance abuse or mental health problems of the tenants. So what have you observed in this regard in Finland, because you are implementing this housing first policy?
Well, I would say that you could also ask that why housing first, which originated in USA, isn't working in USA.
Exactly.
I think that would be the real research question, and I think that it has a lot to do with of course with housing policy. It has a lot to do with the culture and the regard of human rights and human value. But I think that probably the best explanation why housing first doesn't work somewhere is that it has been implemented as individual projects that are depending on a very short-term financing, and also of the fact that they have not been following exactly the principles of housing first in the sense that they have not probably provided enough support for people in housing first. And this is of course something that we have realized also in recent years, that when we fail in housing first, it normally means that the support has not been intensive enough. And I think that we have also realized that we have underestimated the need of support for people who have been homeless for a very long time in some individual cases. This is one of the explanations. But the main explanation is that housing first doesn't work in a context where temporary accommodation is still the main option to homelessness. In that context, it means that housing first is simply one more service option among others, and it should be it should be mainstream. It should be the only policy. We have quite enough results that shows that it works, and we don't have any other approach that could have comparable results in solving homelessness as housing first. So you have to think about the reasons why in this context housing first doesn't work. And normally when I go to some other country, people say that yes, we would upscale housing first, but we don't have the housing for that. So how can you have housing first if you don't have housing first available? So yeah. This is quite obvious. You can't make false promises. You have to make sure that you have the housing available to make it work.
Yeah, I understand. So I think when you have a housing first policy, and as part of implementing it, if you are only providing people with temporary accommodations and let's say shelters and hostels, yeah. So it doesn't actually help to solve the long-term homelessness problem. But in Finland, you are doing it in a different way, because you are not providing people with temporary accommodations, you are actually giving people a home, an independent home of their own. So nobody is coming, like, let's say the next morning, and nobody is coming and just telling the tenant that, hey, you cannot stay here anymore, so just get out. So it doesn't happen in Finland. So when you give someone a house in Finland, it's permanent, it's their own. So when you have this policy in practice at the national level, so it actually does help to solve homelessness problem, because it's independent and it's a house that the homelessness people can say it's their own.
Yeah, I think that this is probably the key thing, and also you can see that in many countries in the big cities where there's a lot of temporary accommodation in shelters and hostels, there's also a lot of people sleeping rough, and the main reason in many cases is that they don't simply accept this temporary accommodation as a solution. They can be too crowded and unsafe places, and they even prefer to sleep rough if that's the only option that's available.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
So this is really the simple truth that the only common thing with people experiencing homelessness is that they don't have a home. So if this is so obvious, why don't we start by providing this basic requirement? Why don't we provide a home with the normal conditions? In Finland, it means that when you have a rental agreement, it means that you have the same rights and the same obligations also as everybody else in the same situation. And also in financial terms, it means that if you don't have enough income to pay the rent, you can get the general housing benefit as everybody else in the same situation who doesn't have enough income to pay the rent. And this is, of course, we have not spoken much about the prevention of homelessness, but this housing benefit, for example, is an important element of the social security system, and it's of course important also in the sense that it helps to prevent homelessness.
Yeah,
when people can get help to pay the rent.
Yeah, exactly. But then there is the problem, I mean, when Nordic approaches to social issues or other issues are presented as examples in policy discussions, people often dismiss those. Why? Because they say what works in the Nordic countries and the Scandinavian region will not work in other places, because the Nordic region is very different on so many fronts. So if they discard the Finnish housing first policy this way, and if they argue that it won't work in other countries, how would you respond to that?
Well, I would say that this is a too simple alibi not to do anything, because as I said earlier, that in many countries where they have projects on housing first, the main obstacle for upscaling is that they don't have the housing. So this is probably the more important element. Of course, this social security system plays an important role also, but it also only shows the kind of moral sentiment in the society that we have to aim to keep everybody on board. It illustrates the understanding of human rights and human value, and I think that this is probably the more important element, this kind of attitudes towards homelessness. In many countries there is still this kind of very common thinking that people are homeless because it's their own fault and they don't deserve anything better. And the starting point is that we have equal human value, and we should treat other people with compassion and respect, and that's the way how we should also aim to solve homelessness.
Yeah,
It's more about attitudes than the Nordic welfare model, which is not, of course, not perfect system. We have our own problems, but I would say that the basic attitude towards how you solve homelessness is the one that seems to work.
Yep, I understand. Some people say the homelessness problem will always be there and you cannot solve it completely. But you disagree on this and you say homelessness can be solved if there is a strong political will. And also you have addressed this in your TED Talk. So you said in your TED Talk that the homelessness problem can be solved and you dream of a world where there will be no homelessness problem and everyone's dignity as a human being will be respected. So I want to know, why do you think political will or commitment is so important to solve homelessness, even more than, let's say, money?
Well, it's simply based on my own experience that in Finland in 2008 we had, I would say, lucky stars, because we had a housing minister who was very much determined to do something on this issue. He understood that we could get concrete results within the next political mandate. But already from the beginning, we have had a very wide political backing for this thing. Since 2008, we have had 8 different governments in Finland, and actually all the parties in the parliament at the moment, they have at some point been in the government because we always have coalition governments, and they have decided that we will continue this policy of housing first to reduce homelessness. So this creates kind of the foundation for the other things that are needed. Of course, it affects also the public opinion on homelessness if all the political parties agree that this is a solvable issue. And of course, it creates also of course, there's need for money. There's no doubt about that. But you need to have the political will and understanding that this is a solvable issue. And I think that we also have a tendency that we are very good in imagining how things go wrong, how homelessness grows, and how problems become bigger. We are very excellent in different kind of dystopia thinking, but we are quite poor in thinking about in our social imagination that if things go well, what would the world look like if there were no homeless, for example? You can't work in ending homelessness if you don't yourself think that it is possible. And I think that there's also on the homelessness sector there are many actors who think that we are always needed. There will always be homelessness, but I would say that this is a totally solvable issue. The need for resources to solve homelessness is still limited compared to many other issues we will face in the coming years. To say nothing about the climate change, for example. This is in comparison, homelessness still is a small issue. It's totally solvable, and I really don't understand how the well-developed societies with a lot of resources can't solve this kind of issue. It's something that doesn't go into my head, that why we have not solved this issue already. I think that we should approach it as a kind of epidemic. We would have a very rapid response and very concrete measures. And I think that the time span is, of course, so important. I have worked now on this sector once again for many years, and I always hear the same thought, thinking, same talk about ending homelessness. And I think that one of the problems is also that there's a lot of talk, but there's less doing things. And we should really move from talking about ending homelessness to really doing it. and in a reasonably short time. I even think that the Finnish aim to end homelessness completely by 27, which means that we would have absolute zero. It's too far away. We could do it, and we should do it much faster.
Yeah, exactly. And the statistics, as it shows, like, because homelessness problem in Finland has been steadily declining over the years. So the goal that the present Finnish government has set to completely eradicate homelessness by 2027, I think it's achievable. And as you said in your TED talk, that you may be an impatient pragmatist, but I think this is how Finnish people work. They see a problem and they always try to pragmatically find a solution and address the problem. In other countries, maybe they're always talking about the problems, they're holding meetings and, setting the work agenda and the goals and the, work objectives, but they actually do not take the action. Whereas in Finland, you actually take proper measures, pragmatic measures and steps. That's why I think it's easier in Finland and also in the Nordic countries, why these countries are doing so well in the on social and economic fronts and in other areas of the society and life.
Yeah, I think that you have some truth in that, and I think that this very pragmatic approach is even more important than the Nordic welfare model itself.
Yeah, exactly. So the housing first policy has been in effect since 2008, and it has evolved over the years. I want to know, what future challenges do you see in the policy's implementation?
Well, I think that one of the challenges probably will be that at this point of time, I think that many organizations working on the sector should already start to think about the life after ending homelessness. What would be their role? Where should they concentrate their efforts? And I think that we have to maximize the efforts in ending homelessness, in preventing homelessness, and the prevention can be done on so many sectors. So this is probably one of the issues, and we still have a small group, a persistent group of people who have very serious social and health issues, and for whom even the housing first model, as we have it in practice at the moment, isn't enough. So there's still need. When we say that there's a success rate of around 80%, people can sustain their housing, we still have this 20%, and we have to find adequate solutions for them. But the good thing is that we know that it's possible. We have to work together to find the solutions, and the solutions can concern both the housing solutions and also the support systems that we have. There's a lot need for more flexibility in our system. So this is probably the one of the big challenges, but we have seen that challenges are there so that we can overcome them, and I think that this is the way how we will work also in the future.
Yep. Okay, thanks. So before ending the meeting, I have a surprise for you. Your first name actually reminds me of the Finnish singer Juha Tapio. Do you know him?
Yeah, I know his production.
Okay, so I actually practice Finnish music, although I do not speak the language fluently. So
Okay.
now I will be singing one of Juha Tapio's songs, a few lines, and then you will tell me how I sound. Okay?
Okay.
So,
I listen. Okay.
Tuulihiuksillaan, hiekkavarpaissaan, silmin hehkuvin, tuttu naapurin, oihin valkeisiin, kansas kauniit niin, kesät kuljettiin. Enkä milloinkaan tullut kertomaan salailtaisin, Meistä haaveilin siitä kuinka jaat mun sulin kiihkeään, kun aamu hamartaa. How was that?
Well, that was beautiful. It was, I would say that it was as good as the original one. I think that as I'm soon retiring from my foundation, I will start a new career as your manager, and I will look for a recording contract for you in Finland.
Thank you. I actually have a plan to come to Finland again to do my master's in media or journalism, and I really hope to meet you at the Y Foundation office. So maybe we'll meet in the future in Finland.
Yes, I really hope that. Yeah. It was very nice talking to you.
Thank you
for this beautiful song. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Juha. Okay. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.